Welcome to the Heart Rate Variability Podcast, where we explore the exciting science behind heart rate variability. The material discussed in this podcast should not be taken as medical advice. Please check with your medical provider to make sure any suggestions or strategies are right for you. Visit us at the OptimalHRV.com website to learn more about the Optimal HRV app, download a free copy of Matt's book, Heart Rate Variability, and also get show notes and additional resources around heart rate variability and its applications. Welcome, friends, to the Heart Rate Variability Podcast. I have the doctors in the house today. So I got Dr. Dave Hopper and Dr. Ina Hazan here. You've met these two geniuses, in my opinion, in previous episodes. And I am so excited to bring their expertise together to start us on a couple, maybe three podcasts, maybe even more, because I think it's a topic that's so important about something I'm titling Vagus Madness. And we're going to take a deep dive into the vagus nerve. So when we talk about heart rate variability, I know in Dave's world, where he's thinking more about physiology and the connection to psychology, I've kind of approached it learning about the physiology, and from the psychological perspective, the vagus nerve just keeps coming up as a central piece in this. And Ina, I know your book gave some great examples of this as well. So I'm excited to bring the brains behind the Optimal HRV app to the surface here. And Dave, we're going to start out with the physical side of this. And I don't think I even knew before a few years ago we had cranial nerves. Sometimes in psychology, we think there's like one nerve that we call the brain, and it goes down through the brainstem, but we kind of forget it, we might think about the cerebellum every once in a while, but we forget that there's a rest of the body down here. So I'm going to turn it over to you to educate us. What the heck is a cranial nerve, and kind of work us up to what is the vagus nerve?
Okay, I'm excited to talk about this topic as well. Very much excited, and well, just to answer your initial question, so cranial nerves, we have 12 pairs of cranial nerves, and those are nerves. The easiest way to look at those is they're just nerves that are within our head. They're nerves that come directly off the brain or the brain stem, actually for the most part. So that's what we are talking about when we talk about cranial nerves. And when we go to talk about what this whole thing is about, the vagus madness, is your vagus nerve, which happens to be your 10th cranial nerve. So you see it as X all the time, right? Roman numerals. And we want to talk about how does this become part of HRV? Mm-hmm. And then what I hope that we can get to today is how to stimulate your vagus nerve all on your own. Awesome. So before we talk about any of that, I think it's very necessary to do a quick overview of what your vagus nerve actually is part of. And we look at your nervous system, okay, and then there's this part called your autonomic nervous system. And how I explain this to patients is just think autonomic, think automatic. So this part of your nervous system controls things that happen automatically in your body. And we are so thankful that we don't have to think about all these processes, right? This is things like your heart beating, things like your lungs breathing, things like digestion, how we absorb our nutrients. We are talking all of those automatic things. That's the part of this nervous system. There is what was taught forever, and we're going to touch on this as well, is that there's generally thought of as two parts to this nervous system. And this is where most people have heard of not so much your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system, but you've heard of your fight or flight system. And a lot of people compare that to a gas pedal. And that's your sympathetics. Then we have your parasympathetics, which most people would equate to a brake pedal. That's your rest, digest, your recover, repair side. both sides of this are extremely necessary for everyday life. And both have very important functions. So, quickly, when we talk about sympathetic nervous system, that is our acute stressors, get away from something. That's what it's thought of. I know, saber-toothed tiger is what is always compared to, and why saber-toothed tiger, rather than something more relevant to today. But then your other side, your brake pedal side, is that is going to be when your body gets into that repair mode. That's what we're hopefully accessing when we're sleeping. And that is what we are spending time in when we're doing things like digesting food, all of that. So when we get down to that, okay, so we have these two big sides of our nervous system, right? We have this one that helps us with acute stressors, and hopefully we're not spending a ton of time there. Then we have this one that is helping us with all of the functions that I would say for our long-term survival. And that parasympathetic side, the brake side, is mostly ran by our vagus nerve. Our vagus nerve is actually about 80% of that parasympathetic function. So why we talk about our vagus nerve being so important is because it runs the majority of the show here. And why, as we're going to talk about here, like why stimulating the vagus nerve is becoming such a big thing is because it kind of just cures everything. And that's what's being found out, is that, oh my gosh, this vagus nerve thing, if it is functioning properly, your body just kind of heals itself from everything. So that is just so cool to see. And of course, that's what we're going to talk about is natural ways to do that. So your vagus nerve starts from your brainstem, way up here. And for those of you who might not be familiar with what your brainstem is, just think you have your brain, and then it's literally like the trunk of a tree or stem of a tree, right? That is coming down, and that is what turns into your spinal cord. So if you picture a head of broccoli, it's the stalk. That's what we got. And the medulla is actually where your vagus nerve is going to arise from. And the medulla is just the very bottom part. So don't worry about all the fancy words. That's what we're talking about there. So when we get into vagus nerve and HRV, how does all this connect? Real quickly, heart rate variability is a measure of the beat-to-beat changes in your heart rate. And I know we've said this, we've done many comparisons, but at this point in this podcast, but if you picture your EKG, you have the QRS complex, or essentially the big spikes, right? And it's the difference in time between each spike is what we are talking about when we're talking about the variance in your heart rate. Those spikes will be longer when the time difference will vary more when your vagus nerve is inputting more information or power, and they will have less of a variation when you have less vagal input, right? So that is how the two really tie together, and that is why HRV becomes such an important measure, because that is how we are measuring, in a way, vagal function.
Awesome. I'd love to bring Ina in here just for a second. And I would love to get Dave sort of filling in the basics here. And I know, Ina, in my journey as a mental health professional, I was familiar, and Stephen Porges, I think, has done a great service, especially in the trauma world. But that was kind of my first exposure to the vagus nerve. I probably heard about it somewhere along the way, but we didn't talk about it that much. I would just love, before Dave continues the journey with us, as something with our physiology that's very, very crucial and central to your work, I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey from the psychological perspective of how this came on your radar, and just sort of your learning curve with this as well.
Yeah. Great question. And, Dave, thank you for that, overview of the basic, underlying physiology, because, it is so important to know, well, what the heck is this thing, where is it coming from? Because, we're talking about, Dave, as you said, vagal stimulation and devices and all this, but, what exactly are we talking about here? So, I learned about the vagal nerve sort of in an almost like a backwards way. I first learned about, biofeedback and HRV, and that was all really cool and wonderful. And as I was untangling HRV and what exactly is it and where does it come from, and that's where the vagal nerve started popping up. Because initially, HRV is the difference in time that passes from heartbeat to heartbeat. The greater variability is better, right? All that, and then what's driving those variations. Where is it coming from? It's the vagus nerve. So my dive into that has been, I guess, from a slightly different direction. And then the association of the vagal nerve, not only with improvements in HRV, but also with the ability to feel safe, right? If you're talking about, trauma, or even, just run of the mill anxiety that all of us experience, the ability to bounce back from that anxiety, the ability to regain a sense of safety. Because if you think about it, what is anxiety? Anxiety means you don't feel safe. At the core of it, yes, evolutionarily saber-toothed tigers. Nowadays it's more, maybe bosses or exams or, road trips or, things like that. So, all of that signals danger, and it's up to the vagal nerve to help us restore a sense of calmness and a sense of safety. And that, really is at the core of our mental health, because if we don't feel safe, we're not going to be able to do a whole lot more, right? So being able to improve the way in which the vagal nerve restores safety for us, which is done through, or can be done through, HRV biofeedback, is key.
Awesome. So Dave, let me come back to you with, is my vagus nerve here? Is it here? Is it here? And Ina did a great job of saying, this thing has something to do with psychological safety, but it's a nerve? Like, well, how's I don't know. Toma, help me kind of where is it? And how do we start to get to things like safety and saber-tooth tiger from just something that I always thought a nerve is just kind of a thing that if you need it, it pops up, but psychological safety and saber-tooth tigers. So let's where the heck is it, and how does it start to play this really powerful role in our overall health and wellness?
Yes, absolutely. And quickly, that's really funny to hear how you learned that. And Matt, I'm assuming a very similar path for you, because I learned the exact opposite, which was here's these nerves, and then you start to learn the functions of each one, and then it was, oh my gosh, well, this one does everything. Let's learn more about this. And then diving down the path until we all wound up in the same place.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes, where it is. So your vagus nerve actually gets its name because it means wanderer, vagabond, or and because it literally wanders, it courses through your entire body. And when most listeners out there probably heard of your brain-gut connection. And that is your vagus nerve. That's literally what we're talking about when we talk about your brain-gut connection. This nerve goes from your brainstem, as we talked about, from your medulla, so the very bottom of your brainstem, and it courses down and just kind of wanders through your body, hitting every single important thing. It's not it just does the left muscle over here, and then it does your shoulder over here, something like that. It is the most important structures in your body that your vagus nerve innervates or gets sensory information from. So it runs down from your brainstem, travels on down into your thorax or your chest, where it is going to, work with things like your heart and your lungs, those super important organs that we have. And then, as I said, it does continue on down and eventually will make its way into your digestive system, where it does do the majority of the communication with all of your digestive organs, with the exception of the very end of your colon, which is really cool. I mean, that this one nerve affects so much. And actually, I want to, when we get to the exercises to stimulate the vagus nerve, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the branches and how that works, because if you want to learn how to stimulate your vagus nerve, well, you just look at where the branches go,
Yeah.
and what they do, and then it's very easy to figure out how you would stimulate said part of the vagus nerve. So it's kind of cool.
Well, I would love to talk about that split. And this has been fascinating. And then, I want to jump to when Dave tells us sort of the physiological piece of this. I'd love to get your piece, and then this will stem up. Don't worry, listener. We will have episodes probably on these branches at some point in this podcast. So we're doing a little bit of an overview here, but so we've got, I know at least the dorsal and the ventral vagal branches. So this branches off. I want you to talk about that branching off, Dave, but I got to just ask a layman's question. Do we really have 12 cranial nerves? Because it almost seems like this dorsal and ventral vagal are its own separate entities. So I want you to talk about this, but I got to throw my nerd question in there too. It's like, should we just give them their own cranial nerve label? I don't know. So you take that. That's just been a question I've had. So
do we? Well, let me. I guess one thing at a time. So yeah. When we go to ventral versus dorsal vagus nerve, that gets quite confusing, because it's like we're talking about two different things, which is one of those. Well, they are two different things, but then they're labeled the same thing. So this gets even deeper into how the separation happens, which is where we go, okay, well, where exactly in the brainstem do these things come from? And it's like, all right, well, not just the medulla, but now we're talking about your nucleus ambiguus versus dorsal motor nucleus, and now we're getting into the real nerdy words.
Oh yeah, and, bring it on, Dave. Bring it on.
So I mean, and quickly, what we would be getting into with this topic is polyvagal theory. So for anybody listening, that's Dr. Stephen Porges came up with this theory. What was that? Matt, like in the early 90s, correct?
I think it started actually back in 60s, 70s, and then has evolved in greatly over the years. But I actually, in early heart rate variability studies, is sort of his foundation, as far as I understand it, where this developed from. So, but it's getting a lot of attention, probably within the last 10 years, especially in the trauma mental health arena.
Okay, yeah, and I'm I guess I'm going based off of his the original polyvagal theory paper.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what this theory is that you do have these two totally different parts of your vagus nerve. You have a ventral and a dorsal side, and essentially what that just means is you have a front ventral and dorsal is back, and that just is more referring to where exactly those nerves come from, less about what they actually do. Mm-hmm. So your dorsal vagus nerve is what would be referred to as your reptilian side. So this is your vegetative, and reason that they would name it reptilian, is because this is something that we share in common with reptiles. And from an evolutionary standpoint, this is the oldest vagus nerve. This is something that we have with them. Now, as evolution continued, this other vagus nerve arose. And something else that I should note about the reptilian is that is unmyelinated. So for those of you who don't know what myelination is, we have these nerves, and you can think of a nerve like an electrical wire or cord, right? So if you cut a extension cord, and please don't try this with one that's plugged in, but if you cut an extension cord, you'll see that there's a bunch of smaller wires inside, but there is a insulated sheet around that cord, which is why we don't get shocked when we pick up an electrical cord that's plugged into something, right? But that is essentially what myelination is. It is an insulation around a nerve, but it helps with conductance speed. So it makes the nerve impulses actually travel faster. So this old dorsal reptilian vagus nerve is old and slow. It does not have the myelination. Now we have our ventral vagus nerve, which is fast. It's speedy. It has that myelination. This is what we would call our mammalian vagus, and this is going to help us a lot with what the two of you work with. And this whole part of this world is what is all new to me. When we get into talking about how your vagus nerve interacts with your other cranial nerves, and all of that, and that is where listening to everything on polyvagal theory and learning all about how oh my gosh, well we read each other's facial expressions, and this feeds back to us, and and that's how we end up reacting to a situation. And actually, maybe one of you could expand a little bit more on that, because that is just fascinating to me. And like I said, I have just begun to learn about all this and dig in real deep. But I know you two are far more experts on how all of that works.
Yeah. So Ina, let me throw it to you. Let me give you also the ability to kind of rewind us from your perspective as well. And I know you and I have had some conversations about the polyvagal theory, so you can throw as much as that in as you want, because I know there's anytime a theory gets really popular, then there's the pushback to said theory as well. So I would like to give you an opportunity, maybe rewind and complement sort of Dave's explanation, which I thought was really good and succinct. It would take me an hour to do what Dave did in 5 minutes. So, but I'd love to kind of hear you go of, okay, we've got this cranial nerve, it splits, go.
And quickly, Matt, Matt and Ina, sorry, I guess I didn't even explain what polyvagal theory is within all of that. I just explained the two different parts, and that is that we have the ability to be socially engaged, which would be a frontal vagal, or I'm sorry, a ventral vagal function. And then when we can't deal with something completely, when that begins to be that system becomes overwhelmed, then we would slip into what would be more of a sympathetic state. And then when we run out of resources there, we would go into a complete dorsal or vegetative vagus type function. That's a super quick chunk down overview. And Ina, go.
Well, so I'll bring it then, to that, social connection piece, and, the sense of safety and some of the physiological actions that are going on around that. That I think, so important, for our lives in general, and, when it comes to talking about heart rate variability. And so the function of the ventral vagus is to give us the ability to connect with others, and in an ideal situation, when we're faced with something stressful, it's the ventral vagus that gets activated, and helps us reach out to other people for help. It helps us reach out, to your therapist, to have somebody to talk with, or your friend to have somebody to talk with, or just the idea of asking for help, and drawing on that strength in numbers as far as human beings go, right? And if we think about this evolutionarily, the biggest reason why our humanoid species, survived, and other humanoids didn't, is probably because of our ability to be so well connected and stick up for each other and protect each other and protect each other's children, et cetera. Right. So that's a really important function of our parasympathetic nervous system, is connection with others. And we know from research that when we don't have great social connections, we don't do so well, both physically and emotionally. So this is really, really important. And even if we think about on a even deeper, physiological level, on a hormone level, the hormone oxytocin, right? Which is commonly called the cuddle hormone or the love hormone, right? Because it is generated when we are in contact with other people. It's generated when we give hugs. It's generated during sexual intimacy. It's generated during breastfeeding for women. It's also generated during labor. So it's a hormone that we think about as this love connection hormone. But what's interesting about it is it's actually a stress hormone. So, oxytocin is actually a stress hormone that gets generated during stressful times in order to help us reach out and engage with others. So there's a very, close connection there between oxytocin and, ventral vagus. And interestingly enough, Sue Carter, who's Steve Porges' wife, is the one that studies, oxytocin. So, they have a nice, relationship between the vagus and oxytocin there. Coming back to this, the system is very well developed to help us be around others and protect, help protect ourselves, through social connection. And when it comes to things like trauma or anxiety, when we don't feel safe around other people, right? For people who have been traumatized, it's often other people that have been the source of that trauma. Not always, of course, sometimes it's, natural disasters and things like that. But oftentimes it is other people. So our ability to feel safe around others gets dysregulated. So that when we are finding ourselves in a challenging situation, a stressful situation, the body's not going to go to that social connection part, because it's a source of the danger. So that's where we're much more likely to slip into either the sympathetic state or the dorsal vagal activation of, I'm freeze and, maybe I'll survive that way.
Awesome. So, one of the questions, that's been brought up to me, and Dave, I'll start with you on this, is it seems like, this parasympathetic, sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system is, let me say something, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. The parasympathetic, sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system is outdated.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah. And as well, I know when I was explaining that earlier, too, I want to be very clear that there is no bad nervous system.
Yeah.
Either.
Oh, yeah.
There is.
If you ever drive in traffic in Denver, and I'm not even in Boston, so if you're driving in traffic, you have your autonomic nervous system to thank for being alive, as I like to say.
Yes, your sympathetics. Same with, when you're playing sports, when you're exercising, any of that stuff, any reaction that you have, like you said, driving in traffic, like all of that stuff is very positive engagement from our sympathetic nervous system. It's just when that system gets left on for too long.
Yeah.
And arguably, it's not even that system being left on too long. It's that our vagal brake isn't working. Mm-hmm. And that is a quote that if I can take directly from Eno's work. That's just so cool, that it can be that situation too. Because too many people look at it the other way around. So
awesome.
That's such an excellent point. I'm going to jump in there, Justin. I think it is so important. We need to be activated properly, right? Imagine if you are Certainly traffic situations, but, what if you are, playing a championship game somewhere, or, just playing with, playing a game with your friends, if you're, doing a job interview, anything important, your body requires activation. And we often misinterpret that helpful sympathetic activation as something that's bad, as something that we need to get rid of, right? Whereas really the body is just doing what it needs to do to help us do our best. And, as Dave said, the problem is not the sympathetic activation coming on. It's not being able to get shut off when it's no longer needed, right? So when that vagal brake is not able to come on and reduce the sympathetic activation, that's when, we get, all sorts of chronic problems. Having, that acute activation of the stress response is a good thing. It's not bad for us. It's not harmful for us. It will not kill us. It will not lead to any long-term medical or emotional problems. The issue really becomes is when the activation is not able to be regulated. And it is the vagal nerve, the parasympathetic nervous system, that provides the regulation, which is why, it's so important to train your parasympathetic nervous system, your vagal nerve, with HRV biofeedback to give it that oomph in regulating your activation.
Wonderful. So let's build off that, because I think that's, and I think, and I don't blame Porges for this whatsoever. I think when you're ever, and I do this with as well, when I try to talk about the brain in 15 minutes, it's ridiculous. So we simplify things. So it's almost like, hey, if you're in your ventral vagal, you're social and safe. When you're in your sympathetic, you're in fight or flight. And when you're in your dorsal, you're in freeze. But there's an interaction between all these systems. I think it's like, oh, well, we want to shut off our sympathetic system. And I'm like, well, as far as I know, you'd be dead if you did that. So I would love to think about this interaction of these systems. And we've thrown around the word vagal brake quite a bit because, I know, and, playing team sports, I wanted to be, I think, and I like to think about the sympathetic nervous system located in sort of the mid-spine area, and correct me if I'm wrong, as kind of the Iron Man movies. And Iron Man has that energy pack right here in his heart. And please do not email me about Iron Man. That's about all I know. So I watched the movies. I've not read the books or the comics. Please don't email me about the specifics. But, there's this energy pack here. And if that energy pack turns off, Iron Man, as far as I know, is dead. But it could also explode and he'd be dead as well. So this interaction between sympathetic, parasympathetic, I think specifically, if I'm right, ventral vagal and sympathetic. Dave, I'd love to hear from you first about Ian and I use the term vagal brake quite a bit, but I'd love to hear your thinking about this interaction when you're trying to help somebody live their healthiest life.
So, a lot of people who come in would be considered, quote unquote, burnt out.
Yeah.
Or anxious or depressed, whatever it might be. But a lot of people are coming in this kind of a state, or, well, heck, I'm a chiropractor. Do you know what a lot of people think chiropractors only work on is pain. So I do also see a lot of people who come in pain. And what part of your nervous system do you think is most active when you are in pain, when you are anxiety ridden? This is your sympathetics are taking over here. And for great reason, because your body thinks that it's being attacked, right? So we need that to happen, or our body believes that is what needs to happen. As Ina was saying, it's when that stays on too long, that's where we start to see these chronic issues come into play. That initial sympathetic drive helps us tremendously, but when that doesn't shut off, we see brain function greatly go down. We see our body just starting to slowly shut down and not function as well in an array of ways.
And just to be clear, because I think this is where we get lost sometimes in the mental health field. When you're saying shut off, you sort of mean that fight or flight sort of response, but we're not shutting off the sympathetic system altogether.
Correct.
Okay.
No, when that is what is tended, what is dominating.
Yeah. Great.
So what we're trying to do is restore that vagal break, and that's the goal of the work that I do, with chiropractic. And that is we know that when we see somebody, we can help stimulate their parasympathetic nervous system. And we can do that with a large input, and we call it that we joke and say we're slamming on your brakes for you, because that's literally what we're doing. And like when you look at your HRV, which I know is what we are all obsessed with here. Yeah. When we look at somebody's HRV, we can see that we did slam on their brakes. Indeed. When you look at that before and after, and that's one of the ways that we look at helping somebody is by giving them that adjustment in the appropriate way that is going to slam on their brakes and help to stimulate their parasympathetic nervous system, and get on that vagal break. Then the next thing, which we're going to talk about as well, which is vagal nerve exercises, ways to stimulate it naturally too. But obviously you guys do some awesome work with that too, in stimulation of the vagal break. We're teaching people how to engage that. So
yeah, Ina, let me throw it to you, because I want to sort of wrap up with Dave's ways to activate. I know we got our thoughts here on, we'll save for the next episode, but when you start to talk to people about the word we're using, vagal break, and it seems to have a couple different names, but usually break is involved in there to some form. Help us understand that, sort of how you explain what's this interaction between ventral, vagal, and sympathetic functioning.
I really see it as our ability to self-regulate, right? I think that's crucial. So many people think about relaxation being incredibly important for well-being, which it certainly is, but that's just one side of it. Coming back to the importance of sympathetic, we need to be able to activate to just the right level, and then we need to be able to stay at that optimal level without overshooting it, and then be able to recover fully once the challenge or the need for activation is over. And that is the function of the vagal break. As something comes up, as there need for activation, the vagal nerve takes its foot off the brake and allows sympathetic activation to come up, and then as that activation comes to the level where it needs to settle, the vagal brake kind of comes on and allows it to stay there right at that optimal level. And once the activation is no longer needed, the brake comes on and allows activation to go all the way down. So this is really all about self-regulation, and relaxation is one part of it, activation is the other part of it. They're both equally important, and your body needs to have a well-trained self-regulation ability in order for you to be at your best, just in your daily life, no matter what it is triggering.
Awesome. Great explanation. Okay, Dave, I'm gonna give you a wide runway here to kind of take us out. But one of the things I've been really fascinated with in my deep dive into heart rate variability and how that manifests from the vagal break and the interaction between ventral, vagal, and sympathetic. And we'll don't worry, friends. We've got plenty of time to nerd out about that, including the second and maybe third episodes of this Vegas Madness series. But Dave, my neck hurt this morning. And I just kind of wonder, when I get, and one of the big things is those trigger points in your body, I guess, are highly connected to the sympathetic system, which is why when I get stressed out, my left shoulder kind of starts to get even lurchier than it already is. So, so my neck hurt. So here's a dumb question, but leads you up to, and to hand really the rest of the episode over to you. How do you, from a chiropractic perspective, look at vagal activation? And if my neck hurts, what should I be doing? And I guess the question is, does that impact my vagus functioning? And just kind of how you look at as vagus health, if that's the right words, from that chiropractic perspective.
Well, how is it affecting your vagal function? It is hurting you for sure, literally. So So yes, any time that you are in pain, we're seeing some of that withdrawal because your body is dealing with that. And again, we do need some of that sympathetic activation to help get us through. And I always look at pain as a very positive thing too, which is confusing, right? Because it tells us, hey, don't use that.
Yeah.
Hey, don't do that. So a lot of times the worst thing you can do for pain is take a painkiller, because then you go on functioning like you're not in pain.
Yeah.
Anyway, side note. But Ina brought up a great point too, and I want to make sure that I touch on that. So teaching self-regulation, doing that is the big key here, right? Because we want to help people realize that they are helping themselves, that their body is capable of doing this on its own. You don't need something else. What you need is to realize that the power is right there within you. You just have to learn how to let it out, right? So that's a lot of this, right? We're not healing anybody. Your body is doing all the magic. Your body is doing all the healing. We're just we're helping you figure out how to allow that to happen. All right. So and sorry, Matt, I know I went around a little bit there.
No, very, very good. I like it.
I'm a very distracted person. So yes, when it comes to, all right, so we helped you out. Now how are we going to get you to stimulate your vagus nerve, which is going to help increase your heart rate variability, which in turn increases your health, right? In every area. So there's a multitude of ways, and Google vagal nerve stimulation, and you'll find a bunch of different things. But like I was saying earlier, the way that I like to look at this is if you follow the different branches of your vagal nerve, where they go to within your body, and what they're doing in that area, you can kind of figure out what you have to do to stimulate those areas. Mm-hmm. So to start off, we have very first branch of our vagus nerve goes off and actually goes to our ear, believe it or not. So we have a part of our outer ear here, and then as well part of our auditory meatus, or the ear hole, as you can look at it, that is innervated by the vagus nerve. So what that means is that we can do something to your ear to help stimulate your vagus nerve. And if you find a vagal nerve stimulator online, you can actually see that these are a lot of times things that clip onto your ear and do some stimulation, and actually helps, with all kinds of healing, helps feel good, which is kind of cool. If you go to an acupuncturist, a lot of times they are going to do stimulation of your vagus nerve through your ear. Mm-hmm. Which is also really cool. I actually work with an acupuncturist who wrote a paper on vagal darts, he calls them, and it's literally kind of like piercing your ear, but they do it at a very specific point, and don't ask me exactly where, but it's somewhere on your ear here.
Don't just start poking holes in your upper ear, folks.
Yes, you need a licensed acupuncturist to do this. And they literally shove this into your ear like an earring almost. Wow. And patients that I've had who've had this done are like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. I just feel great. And then it eventually works its way out and drops out. But then they also do, acupuncturists can also do like ear stones and stuff like that they can also tape on in that specific area. I'm sure that you guys have probably seen at least some of this, correct? Yeah. So that's, branch number one. All right. So that's what we can do over there. I also kind of think, I also always wonder, not that I am recommending this to anybody, but those of you who might use Q-tips to clean your ears, I always kind of wonder, is that why it kind of feels really good?
That's a great question.
That's not what Q-tips are for, and I'm not endorsing that. All right. Then if we continue going down, so in our throat is going to be the next branch. All right. So we look in our throat, and that is going to help with some of the muscles of our pharynx, our soft, so our throat, fancy word there, our soft palate. So that's the top of our mouth. And the soft palate is the farthest back portion, the portion that has your uvula or the dangly thing in the back of your mouth. That's your soft palate, and then your tongue, and only one muscle of your tongue. But all of these things are to aid with swallowing. And so then, okay, so if I do some swallowing stuff, that could stimulate my vagus nerve. If I do some gargling, that could stimulate my vagus nerve. But yawning, okay, all right, well, those things could as well help. And then you look at practices like yoga, and they do things like fire breathing, and all of that. And you're like, oh, wow, like, all right, were these people really onto something? And a lot within yoga, when you learn other things, you go, huh, they really knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
That's why it works so well. But things like fire breathing, there is an exercise where you can do like humming and buzzing in your mouth, buzzing in your throat, you're buzzing your brain, we call it, where you be humming and you switch the place where the humming's coming from, to help with stimulation of all that. And then as well, breathing through your ears, which is a way to actually open up your eustachian tube. Yes, I love that look, Matt.
I'm trying, Dave. I'm trying.
So we call it breathing through your ears. Of course, you're not actually breathing through your ears, but if you take a second, close your mouth, and you try to picture yourself breathing in and out through your ears, you can actually get your ears to pop. Are you getting that to happen?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know what I'm talking about here?
Sort of, yeah.
Okay. So you can get your ears to pop there, and actually, this is a really cool thing to teach kids, because it can help with draining as well, drainage to the ears and whatnot. Then as we continue moving down, right? So we have two branches that are going to go to our voice box, essentially. So we have one from above, one from below, and this is all right. Well, what can we do? We can sing. We can just straight up scream. We can do all of these things that can help stimulate our vagus nerve from that way, right? Why do we feel great when we sing, right? As soon as you start singing, you feel better. And that is for an array of reasons. But one of those, and I've always wanted to see this as well. Maybe you guys are aware of some research that people who sing in a choir have higher HRVs or something like that, or, singer performers might have higher HRVs. But that is a way, yelling, which I automatically think of that stuff that they called music, that was a screamo for a little bit. I don't know if you guys remember when that was a thing for a second.
Yeah, I might have spent some of my adolescence in a mosh pit, so I think I know what you're talking about there.
Okay, yes, yeah, but I mean, those guys got to feel really good, and
yeah,
and,
oh yeah,
it's children scream for fun.
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, you're yelling and sing. I mean, my wife thinks I'm crazy for having been in mosh pit, maybe up until a few years back at a Social Distortion concert. But like, it's just like this beautiful community of people singing together, dancing together, and kind of running into each other in maybe violent ways at times. But, when it's a bunch of 40-year-olds at a Social D concert, it's a little safer than, back in the day at the, death metal concerts I may or may not have been to.
Fun concerts nonetheless. Yeah.
Yes. Very fun.
So as we continue to go down, we have these other things, these chemoreceptors, baroreceptors, which is something that that we're going to get into later, I suppose, with breathing, because breathing actually affects both of those.
Yeah.
so we can talk about that a little bit more. But then then we go into our cardiac plexus, we go into our pulmonary plexus of our vagus nerve. And with both of those, okay, so what's something that stimulates my lungs and stimulates my heart? Exercise, moving. So very easy. We can go, all right, cool. So here's something that we can do that also stimulates your vagus nerve. And guess what? Aerobic exercise improves your HRV. So very cool. And of course, we don't have to tout the benefits of exercise. We all know that that's something we should be doing, right? But another thing that can really help with all this is just breathing. And being the expert on this is something that I think we can talk extensively on, and potentially even just do an entire podcast on proper breathing and breathing to stimulate vagus nerve and all of that. So for now, I'll just say breathing.
Yeah.
And then we go on down, and you have your esophageal plexus. So your esophagus, right? As your esophagus continues to wind down, we have our vagus nerve wrapping around that, and then going down into our diaphragm, through our diaphragm rather, with our esophagus and into your whole GI system. And again, when you're thinking about your esophagus, when you're thinking about your entire GI system, what are things that are going to help that? And I'm going to, all right, we can get into the whole how food and probiotics and all of that kind of stuff can help. But I mean, another thing is just moving as well. Again, here comes exercise rearing its ugly head again, right? Because moving actually moves all that stuff and gives a whole bunch of great feedback, as does the foods that you are putting in your body and everything too. Now, and then of course you could do GI massages and that stuff too. But anyway, in general, if we wanted to stimulate our vagus nerve, like if we didn't want to look at it from that perspective, what are some general things that we can do, right? And we already talked about acupuncture. We talked about chiropractic. We mentioned yoga, but yoga is an awesome thing. Matt, I believe you do Tai Chi, right?
Yes. Yep.
There you go. So another thing that involves movement, but also involves, that deeper connection, not only with yourself, but your environment, and all of that. Then Matt, I know you and I utilize this. I don't know about you, but the cold showers,
Yeah.
or just cold therapy in general. So cold stimulation is another thing that we've seen and becoming more and more popular, especially with things like the Wim Hof method. Which, are you guys familiar with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So essentially just a bunch of crazy people freezing themselves.
Yeah. Running marathons in the Arctic barefoot. Yeah. A lot of things we don't encourage listeners to go right out and do, but interesting dude with some science behind it. I find it fascinating.
Yes, we're very, very powerful. Very cool. Then so other things, laughing, smiling, things like this, just being happy in general, being around people that you love and enjoy, which, as foo-foo as that sounds, you know what? That is healthy for you.
Yeah. That
is pure healthy for you. We talk about the social engagement system and all of that. You are fully in that social engagement, that ventral vagal system, when you are loving, laughing, having a good time. You could not be more ventral vagally expressed, in those moments. Again, another cool thing that I just thought, well, it'd be interesting to see what your HRV is like when you are just having an awesome time with friends and family and all that. So right in the midst of it, but it'd be kind of hard to say, stop.
Yeah.
All right, and then some other things. Sleep, of course, which should be a top priority for everyone. But just in general, sufficient quality sleep, time in nature, and then when we get into in time and nature, sorry, that is just another one of those, being in an environment that you thoroughly enjoy, and maybe even if you're not a nature lover, but enjoying the fresh, clean air, seeing the abundance of the world, those types of things is what we are looking at. That's making us feel so great, feel so alive, feel so connected. That's what it is all about. Then there is meditation as well, which I know Matt, you and I have talked a bunch about that. And Ina, I believe that you are a meditator as well, correct?
Absolutely.
Yes. And then there is vagal nerve massages as well, which I've seen, and you can definitely try out some of that type of stuff. The only area that I've really seen anything where people are really like, oh yes, like, that significantly worked, was doing massage through your cervical area, through your neck area. And then tapping as well. Are you guys familiar with tapping?
Yeah.
Okay. So some of the tapping. And then Stanley Rosenberg, which you guys are both familiar with, right?
Yeah.
So he's got some awesome exercises out there as well, which are supposed to be helpful with stimulation of the vagus nerve. And the name of his book is escaping me. What is
I think Accessing the Healing Power of the Vagus Nerve. I don't know. I've read too many books to roll off.
Yeah, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but Stanley Rosenberg. Yeah, he's and he's got his salamander exercises and and I forget the name of the other one, the basic exercise. Very, very basic name. All right, and then I think the only thing that I would be forgetting would be like this really small thing that, is pretty insignificant called biofeedback.
Yeah.
So, and I know that biofeedback, obviously, we are going to really go deep on.
Yeah.
So I did not want to include that here. Similar with breathing, I just wanted to make sure that we mention it, but something that needs its own hour, its own time dedicated. So
awesome. Well, that gives us a great list. And just so our readers know, if you're not familiar with things like tapping and some of these other things that Dave mentioned, we'll likely go into those in a lot more detail in future episodes. So Dave, I really appreciate giving us some things to think about. I always like to reinforce things folks are already doing as well. So if you're already doing some exercise or movement, or hey, maybe you're in a choir or you sing at church, whatever that might be, really reinforcing that. And then in future episodes, we'll give you more information about new things that can go in to your health and wellness routine, or if you're in a helping and healing role, bringing these into your practice as well. So this has been a great episode. Again, number 1 in Vegas Madness. This one ran an hour, so I'm sure we at least got 2 more in here. So in our next episode, we're going to turn over to Ina and really look at the psychological parts of this, to do a dive from her perspective and with her research, and really talk about mindfulness, breathing, these sort of things to help us regulate as well. So stay tuned for a lot more. Again, you can find show notes, Ina and Dave's earlier episodes at optimalhrv.com or heart rate variability podcast.com. Thanks for joining us. Stay healthy, my friends, and we will see you next week.